Atlanta, 1970. Basement gym beneath the Civic Center. No cameras, no press. Just 25 boxing men in a concrete room that smells like decades of sweat and broken dreams. And one question hanging in the humid Georgia air, like smoke from a cigarette nobody wants to finish. Is Muhammad Ali still real? Or is this comeback just the desperate gasp of a fallen king? The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting harsh shadows across faces that have seen everything boxing has to offer. Trainers who've built champions from nothing. Promoters who know the difference between hype and heart. Local fighters who've earned their respect one bloody round at a time. All waiting to see if 3.5 years away from the ring has turned the most famous man on earth into just another cautionary tale about pride in politics. The air is thick with skepticism and morbid curiosity. These men have gathered to witness what might be the funeral of a legend. Jerry Quarry stands in the corner, 25 years old, hands already wrapped, watching Ali move around the makeshift ring like he's studying prey. Quarry's seen the footage, read the newspapers, heard all the talk about conscience and conviction. But what he sees in front of him is a 28-year-old man who hasn't fought anyone meaningful since Zora Fali in March 1967. A man who chose politics over pugilism and might be about to pay the price that politics always demands from athletes who think they're bigger than the game. For Jerry Quarry, this moment represents more than just another sparring session. This is personal vindication 3 years in the making. While Ali was fighting the government in courtrooms, Quarry was fighting heavyweights in real rings. While Ali made headlines with principles, Quarry made his mark with work ethic and technical precision. The son of a stone quarry worker, Quarry earned everything through determination. No Olympic gold, no early fame, just a blue-collar kid from Bellflower who discovered he had fast hands and an iron chin. Every ranking was earned through violence and dedication that most people mistake for obsession. Now he stands 15 feet away from the man whose absence created the opportunity that defined Quarry's career. While Ali was making moral statements, Quarry was making professional statements. While Ali fought principles, Quarry fought prize fighters. And now, finally, he gets the chance to prove which approach produces better actual fighters. The room carries an electricity that has nothing to do with the overhead lighting. These aren't casual observers or paying customers. These are the people who know what real fighting looks like when the cameras stop rolling and the crowd goes home. Men who can tell the difference between showmanship and skill, between reputation and reality. And most of them are here because they smell blood in the water. Ali enters the ring barefoot, wearing simple black trunks and a white tank top. No robe, no entourage, no theatrics. Just a man who looks like he's carrying the weight of every decision he's made since the last time anyone saw him fight for real. His face is calm, but there's something in his eyes that wasn't there before the exile. Something deeper. Something that looks like it was forged in courtrooms and controversy rather than gymnasiums and glory. The contrast with Jerry Quarry couldn't be more stark. Where Ali moves with the controlled grace of experience, Quarry radiates the hungry energy of youth. Where Ali's confidence seems measured and thoughtful, Quarry's appears almost predatory. This is a young man who spent the last 3 years winning fights while the former champion fought lawyers. A fighter who's earned his #1 contender, ranking the hard way, beating legitimate heavyweights while Ali was making speeches and filing appeals. Quarry's record speaks for itself. 25 wins, 3 losses, and a reputation for breaking men who thought their names alone would protect them. He's the kind of fighter who studies tape until his eyes burn, who runs in the California hills until his lungs scream, who hits the heavy bag like he's got a personal grievance against it. The kind of young lion who sees an aging king and starts calculating when the crown might slip. You know what they're saying about you, Quarry says, his voice carrying clearly in the concrete acoustics of the basement. It's not hostile exactly, but there's an edge to it that makes the room even quieter than it already was. They're saying prison made you soft. 3 years of reading books instead of fighting men. Ali doesn't respond immediately. He continues his slow circuit of the ring, hands loose at his sides, breathing steady and controlled. But there's something in his movement that suggests he's listening to more than just Quarry's words. He's listening to the room itself, to the skepticism that hangs in the air like humidity. to the whispers that have followed him since the Supreme Court decision that brought him back to boxing. They say you lost your hunger, Quarry continues, stepping closer to the center of the ring. That standing up for your principles cost you more than just your titles. That it cost you your edge, your killer instinct, everything that made you dangerous in the first place. The trainers along the walls lean forward slightly, not consciously, but with the involuntary movement of men who sense that something significant is about to happen. This isn't the usual pre-fight posturing or promotional bluster. This feels different, more personal, more real. Ali finally stops moving and looks directly at Quarry, not with anger or defensiveness, but with the kind of steady attention that makes strong men uncomfortable. When he speaks, his voice carries none of the familiar bravado that made him famous. Instead, it has the quiet authority of someone who's learned to choose his words carefully. Jerry, Ali says, and just using the younger man's first name somehow changes the entire dynamic in the room. You think 3 years away from this made me soft? Quarry nods, his jaw set with the kind of certainty that only comes from being 25 years old and having never been truly broken by life. I think it made you forget who you were. I think it made you forget what this costs. What happens next surprises everyone in that basement, including Jerry Quarry himself. Ali doesn't argue, doesn't defend himself, doesn't launch into one of the poetic proclamations that made him a global icon. Instead, he does something that no one expected from the man who once declared himself the greatest of all time. He agrees. You're right, Ali says simply. 3 years did change me. The question is whether you understand what it changed me into. The silence that follows is absolute. 25 men who make their living understanding the subtle psychology of combat are suddenly dealing with variables they don't know how to calculate. This isn't the Ali they remember. This isn't the confident young man who danced and jabbed his way to 3 heavyweight titles. This is someone else entirely. Someone who seems comfortable with doubt and uncertainty in ways that fighters aren't supposed to be. Quarry studies Ali's face, looking for some tell, some sign of weakness or deception. But what he sees there is something he wasn't prepared for. Not fear exactly, but something that looks like acceptance. Like a man who stared at the worst version of himself in a mirror and somehow managed to find peace with what he saw. Show me, Ali says quietly. Show me what you learned while I was gone. Show me what this new generation brings to the ring. It's not a challenge in the traditional sense. It's something stranger than that. An invitation, maybe, or a request. As if Ali genuinely wants to understand what's changed in boxing while he was fighting different kinds of battles in different kinds of arenas. Quarry hesitates. Not from fear. There's nothing in his 25-year-old body that knows how to be afraid of another man in a boxing ring, but from confusion. This conversation isn't following any script he prepared for. Ali was supposed to be defensive about his time away, angry about the accusations, eager to prove that the old fire still burned as hot as ever. Instead, he seems genuinely curious about what Quarry has to offer, like a master craftsman examining the work of a promising apprentice, not to judge or criticize, but to learn something about where the craft is headed. But Jerry Quarry didn't climb to the #1 contender ranking by overthinking opportunities when they presented themselves. If Ali wants to see what the new generation has learned, Quarry is happy to provide a demonstration. He steps forward, sets his feet, and throws the kind of jab that's ended careers. Fast, sharp, technically perfect. The kind of punch that's traveled from his shoulder to its target in less time than it takes most people to blink. Ali's head moves, not dramatically, not with the theatrical rope-a-dope motion that made him famous. Just a subtle shift, 2 inches to the left, and Quarry's fist cuts through empty air. But that's not what stops the conversation in the room. What stops every breath and every heartbeat is what Ali does next. Nothing. He doesn't counter. Doesn't capitalize on the opening that Quarry's extended jab has created. Doesn't even seem particularly interested in the fact that he just made one of the most dangerous young heavyweights in the world miss completely. He just stands there, hands still at his sides, looking at Quarry with something that might be disappointment. Again, Ali says softly. Quarry resets immediately, professional instinct and pride demanding that he erase the miss with something more convincing. He throws across this time, putting his entire body behind it. Hip rotation, weight transfer, everything he learned from the best trainers California has to offer. Ali takes a half step back, and the punch whistles past his jaw like a train passing a station platform. Close enough to feel the wind of it, but never close enough to be dangerous. The room is starting to understand that they're watching something unusual. Not unusual in the sense of spectacular or dramatic, but unusual in the sense of impossible. Quarry isn't just throwing punches. He's throwing perfect punches. Textbook combinations executed with the speed and precision that made him a contender. And they're all missing by margins so small that it looks like Ali is standing perfectly still while reality bends around him. "What are you doing?" Quarry asks, frustration creeping into his voice for the first time. Ali's answer changes everything. Not just in the room, but in both of their careers, in both of their understanding of what fighting actually means when it's stripped of ego and ambition and reduced to its essential truth. "I'm listening," Ali says. The response doesn't make sense. Not in any conventional boxing context. Fighters don't listen to punches. They throw them, block them, counter them. But Ali's using the word like it means something specific, something that transcends the usual vocabulary of combat sports. "Listening to what?" Ali moves closer, close enough that the next punch Quarry throws will have to land. Close enough that there's no room for mistakes or miscalculations. And when he speaks, his voice carries the kind of gentle authority that comes from understanding something fundamental about the nature of conflict itself. "To what you're really trying to say." Quarry throws a hook, putting everything behind it. Not just his physical strength, but his reputation, his ranking, his belief in himself as the future of the heavyweight division. The kind of punch that should end conversations and settle disputes. Ali slips it by turning his shoulder 45 degrees. The movement is so economical, so precisely calibrated, that it looks like he barely moved at all. But Quarry's fist passes inches from Ali's temple, and suddenly the younger fighter understands that he's not just missing punches, he's missing the point entirely. Because Ali isn't fighting him, Ali is teaching him. Every miss, every subtle defensive movement, every calm response to aggression is part of a lesson that Quarry didn't realize he was being offered. "You want to prove you're better than me?" Ali says. And it's not an accusation. It's an observation made with the clinical objectivity of a doctor diagnosing symptoms. "You want to prove that time and principles made me weak, that your hunger is stronger than my experience." Quarry nods, not trusting his voice. Because that's exactly what he wants to prove. What he came here believing he could prove. "But Jerry," Ali continues, his voice never rising above conversational volume, despite the intensity of what's happening between them. "You're not fighting me. You're fighting who you think I used to be. And that man doesn't exist anymore." The room has gone completely still. Even the fluorescent lights seem to have stopped flickering. 25 boxing professionals are watching something they don't have words for yet. Something that will take years to fully understand and even longer to properly explain to people who weren't there to witness it. Along the walls, seasoned trainers find themselves leaning forward involuntarily. Mickey Rosenberg, who spent 40 years in gyms, removes his glasses and cleans them slowly, as if the problem might be with his vision rather than his understanding. A young promoter stops taking notes entirely, pen frozen above his notepad as he watches Quarry miss target after target against a man who appears perfectly still. The silence carries weight, as if the air itself has become heavier with witnessing something that shouldn't exist in normal physics in boxing. Ali steps back, creating space between them, and for the first time since the sparring began, he raises his hands. Not into a fighting stance exactly, but into a position that suggests he's ready to engage on a different level. "You want to see what 3 years away from this taught me?" Ali asks. Before Quarry can answer, Ali moves forward, not with a dancing, lateral motion that made him famous, but with a direct, purposeful advance that somehow seems more dangerous than anything he did in his championship years. He throws a jab. Not fast by his standards, not particularly powerful, but placed with such precision, timed with such perfection, that Quarry's counterpunch never materializes. The jab doesn't just hit him, it stops him. Stops his momentum, his confidence, his entire offensive rhythm. And then Ali does something that no one in that basement will ever forget as long as they live. He stops fighting and starts talking. Not to the room, not to the 25 observers who came here expecting to see the end of a legend. He talks directly to Jerry Quarry in the middle of a sparring session, like they're having a conversation over coffee instead of trading punches in a gym that smells like violence and broken dreams. You know what those 3 years taught me, Jerry? They taught me that fighting isn't about proving you're better than the other man. It's about proving you're better than who you were yesterday. Quarry throws another combination. Everything he has, every technique he's mastered, every trick he's learned from studying film of Ali's greatest victories. Ali deflects it all with movements so subtle they're almost invisible, like he's conducting a violent symphony, and Quarry's aggression is just another instrument in the orchestra. They taught me that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit, Ali continues, his voice never changing despite the fact that he's simultaneously avoiding punches that could knock most men unconscious. It's about how much you can take and still find a way to lift someone else up. You see, Jerry, Ali says, catching a jab on his glove and redirecting it past his ear with casual precision. 3 years in courtrooms taught me something no gym ever could. They taught me to listen to my opponent's argument before responding, to understand what they're really fighting for, not just what they're fighting against. Most boxers throw punches to hurt people. The best boxers throw punches to teach people. There's a difference. Ali pauses his movement for just a moment, standing completely still while Quarry resets for another attack. In those Supreme Court hearings, lawyers would attack my character, my patriotism, my right to make choices about my own life. They wanted me to fight back with anger, with defensiveness, with the same energy they were bringing to me. But I learned something powerful in those rooms, Jerry. The strongest response to attack isn't always counterattack. Sometimes it's understanding. Sometimes it's seeing what pain is driving the attack in the first place. Something in Quarry's chest starts to crack. Not physically, but emotionally. The certainty that brought him to this basement, the conviction that he was here to expose a fraud and claim his rightful place in boxing history, begins to crumble under the weight of what he's experiencing. Because Ali isn't just outboxing him, Ali is teaching him about boxing, about fighting, about what it means to be a warrior in a world that confuses violence with strength and aggression with courage. Those 3 years taught me that the hardest fights aren't in rings like this, Ali says, still moving, still deflecting, still teaching with every gesture. They're in courtrooms and congressional hearings and newspaper editorial pages. They're fought with words and principles and the willingness to lose everything for something bigger than yourself. Quarry stops throwing punches, not because he's tired or hurt, but because he suddenly understands that this isn't a sparring session anymore. This is something else entirely, something that transcends boxing and touches on questions about manhood and courage that go far beyond who can hit harder or move faster. But you know what they didn't teach me, Jerry? Ali asks, lowering his hands completely and stepping close enough that Quarry could hit him without even extending his arm. What? Quarry whispers. They didn't teach me to be bitter. They didn't teach me to hate the people who disagreed with me or the system that punished me. They didn't teach me to come back here looking for revenge. Ali puts his hand on Quarry's shoulder. Not in a patronizing way, but with the genuine affection of someone who recognizes something valuable in another person. Something that deserves to be nurtured rather than defeated. They taught me to come back looking for understanding, for connection, for ways to use this thing we do, this beautiful, brutal thing we do, to make people better instead of just beating them down. The silence in the basement is profound, not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper. Something that feels like reverence for a moment that everyone present understands is important, even if they can't yet articulate why. Jerry Quarry, 25 years old, ranked #1 contender for the heavyweight championship of the world, starts crying. Not from frustration or pain, but from recognition. Recognition that he came here expecting to face a diminished version of Muhammad Ali, and instead encountered an evolved version that he wasn't prepared to understand. I don't know how to fight that, Quarry admits, his voice breaking slightly. Ali's smile is gentle, paternal, completely free of the competitive edge that usually defines interactions between elite athletes. You don't fight it, Jerry. You learn from it, and then you teach it to someone else. What happens next creates one of the most important relationships in boxing history, not because of victories or defeats, but because of mutual respect forged in a moment when competition transformed into collaboration. Quarry extends his hand, not in surrender, but in recognition. Recognition that he's just experienced something that will change how he thinks about fighting, about competing, about what it means to be a champion. Ali takes the hand and pulls the younger fighter into an embrace that the room instinctively understands is private, despite the 25 witnesses. This is a moment between two warriors who found something in each other that transcends the usual dynamics of their sport. "Teach me," Quarry says into Ali's ear. "Only if you teach me too," Ali responds. And that's how Jerry Quarry becomes not just Ali's most important sparring partner during his comeback years, but his closest friend. That's how a young fighter who came to expose a fraud instead discovers a master who changes his understanding of what mastery actually means. For the next 5 years, until Ali's permanent retirement, they train together whenever their schedules allow. Not as opponents preparing for battle, but as collaborators exploring the deepest possibilities of their craft. Quarry brings his technical precision and relentless work ethic. Ali brings his wisdom and his understanding of how to transform conflict into connection. Their partnership becomes legendary among boxing insiders. Other fighters seek them out, drawn by stories of sparring sessions that sound more like philosophy seminars conducted with fists and footwork. Young prospects and aging veterans alike make pilgrimages to watch them work together, hoping to understand what makes their dynamic so different from typical boxing relationships. The lesson spreads throughout the sport like ripples in a pond. The idea that competition doesn't have to destroy competitors, that fighting can be an act of mutual elevation rather than mutual destruction, that the strongest warriors are often the ones who know when to stop fighting and start teaching. When Ali retires for good in 1981, Quarry is there, not as a former opponent, but as a brother who understands the cost of greatness better than almost anyone else in boxing. When Quarry's own career ends, damaged by too many wars and not enough wisdom early on, Ali is there too, helping him transition from fighting to teaching, from competitor to mentor. They remain close until Quarry's death in 1999. Their friendship serving as a testament to what's possible when strong men choose understanding over dominance, growth over victory, connection over conquest. The basement in Atlanta where it all began is long gone, demolished to make way for a parking garage. But the lesson that was learned there continues to resonate through boxing and beyond. The understanding that true strength isn't about what you can do to other people, but what you can do for them. That real champions don't just beat opponents, they create other champions. And sometimes in the quiet corners of gyms around the world, when young fighters are struggling with questions about courage and competition, old trainers still tell the story of the day Muhammad Ali told Jerry Quarry to hit him, and both men discovered something more valuable than victory. They discovered what it means to transform combat into compassion, fighting into friendship, and rivalry into respect. The greatest fight, it turns out, isn't the one you win. It's the one that makes everyone involved better than they were before the bell rang.